So hello everybody. Many former coal mining sites, typically located on the periphery of what were once mining towns and villages, simply remain as semi-derelict landscapes, devoid of their iconic structures such as the pit wheel and the engine house, largely unmanaged, crisscrossed by a myriad of unofficial footpaths, surrounded by broken fences with rough vegetation and shrub interspersed with colliery waste, hard standing, building rubble, rusting metal, and the ubiquitous debris of the fly tipper. It's not sharing.
I think what happens is every time we end a talk, it stops sharing for some reason, and then you've just got to get back into it. There seems to be no easy way around it. Okay. I'm just babbling to fill in the gap.
Sorry, okay. So Susan's already mentioned Landscape Legacies of Coal was a community-facing research project that explored how the public experience, engage with, and actually understand these marginal spaces, as well as utilising their historic and heritage landscape value to narrate the story of Scottish coal mining. And this was in a series of co-produced and curated heritage walks that were free to download on a mobile phone app. And they largely focused on Clackmannan and Stirlingshire. And I have to admit today to being a bit of a cuckoo in the nest because I'm going national as opposed to staying local. Now, the project comes to an end in December. And remarkably, it's been running since 2017. And many of you, as Susan has intimated, will already be familiar with it. You may have the app on your phone, or you may have been involved in creating the walking routes or taken part in the research. So other than provide a brief recap of the project, what I'm going to do this afternoon is explore some of the recent activities that have taken place under the umbrella of Coal Legacies project and our ambitious plans to revamp and rebrand the walking and cycling routes as an eco-museum of Scottish mining landscape. So the quick recap then. The project was funded by the Mac Robert Arts Centre, so here on campus, and was designed to complement their community heritage initiative based around coal. And this consisted of a contemporary dance performance set at the time of the miners' strike, choreographed by Gary Clark, an exhibition by Falkirk artist Philip Gurry entitled Undermined, community art and drama workshops in Socky and Fillin, and community screenings of The Enemy Within. So the Coal Legacies project ended up with two components, the app and the academic research. They were kind of intrinsically linked. One essentially facilitated the other. And I should say that in terms of the academic side of the research, I do work with a sociology colleague, Ian McIntosh, but he prefers to stay quietly hidden in the background, to the extent I couldn't even find a photograph of him. So the Coal app, as it became known, was a series of around 20 completed community-produced live-tracked walking and cycling routes, as I've said, largely focusing on Stirling and Clackmannanshire. Each self-contained journey narrated the local history of coal mining through the surviving landscape features and the industrial archaeology, and included the social landscapes of housing, sport, leisure, also the transport infrastructure, the associated industries, particularly brickmaking. And points of interest along the routes were mapped, illustrated with stories, information, historic photographs and maps, community artworks, and audio recording memories and song. And it proved remarkably popular. It's been downloaded around about 3,500 times around the world. and it's featured in the Scottish National Press, and what I'm really proud of, it made the travel section of The Guardian last year. Now, the app is no longer available to download. Apple and Google withdrew the generic support for the generic template that it was designed to. So if you have it on your phone, it will still work, but it is coming to the end of its functioning life. It's going to get increasingly clunky, and it is beginning to look quite dated now. But it leaves me with a problem. I have a significant database. The routes, if combined, amount to around about 180 miles. They contain around about 1,000 illustrated points of interest, with approximately 1,000 maps, images, and oral testimonies, within a word count of around 200,000. That will shortly no longer be accessible to the public. And this has resulted in a pressing need to both safeguard and to ensure a more sustainable future for what really is a significant community heritage asset. The academic study explored the socio-cultural value of these sites, so how the public engage with these spaces, both physically and emotionally. And we used a mixed methodology, combining traditional historical research with ethnographic approaches, so face-to-face interviews, an online questionnaire, and on-site observations. We also included 2 focused case studies, Polmaze at Fillin and the Devon at Fish Cross, so kind of mirroring McRoberts' project and our 2 original routes on the app. So physical engagement was pretty straightforward. The former mining communities that live within their shadow physically engage with these marginal spaces, often on a daily basis, from walking with or without a dog, running, cycling, photography, flying drones, model aircraft, dirt biking, as in the slide. They are notoriously difficult to photograph, den building, through to the more curious behaviours such as playing bagpipes, to parking up and having a lunchtime snooze. So they're lovely, unregulated spaces to play where the imagination can run wild. They're also spaces for quiet contemplation and reflection. For many former miners and their families, there is that emotional attachment too. And I have some of the responses here that are taken directly from the online questionnaire. So whilst former colliery sites often represent a profound sense of loss and can be understood as sites of trauma and individual and collective suffering that inform narratives and stories that linger and reverberate well beyond the point of the pit closure. So this is the idea of social haunting, which I'm going to come back to. They also provide a wonderful sense of historical and personal continuity, an anchor point for identity, and a link to the past that helps understand the present. And mediating this attachment, both the positive and the negative, was the topography, so the actual location and visibility of the derelict site to the actual adjacent community, the nature of pit closure, so political versus geological, and the history of the site from closure to present day, some of its reuses and repurposing. So that was the academic project. That was written up and was published in the March edition of Landscape in 2021. And it was a small project. It barely scratched the surface. And it highlighted a real significant number of unexpected and interesting avenues that definitely need further exploration. So pollution, as in acid mine drainage, which was talked about this morning, and fly tipping, were always present at all of the sites. But it didn't feature in any of the responses. It was never mentioned at interview. It was never picked up on a questionnaire. It was seemingly overlooked or unseen. So that puzzled us. Something else that we weren't anticipating was that many respondents deliberately walked the derelict land to experience nature. So most former colliery sites are located in a wider rural and more natural context. So why choose the derelict land? You know, what was driving this? I mean, you are certainly left in no doubt about nature's tenacity to repair and recover. And this is the Bing at High House Colliery at Auchinleck in East Ayrshire. It's wonderfully diverse. Also, whilst open cast mining sites were physically engaged with, typically dog walking, the usual things, emotional attachment to these sites was pretty much zero. Interviewees and respondents made no mention of them other than disparaging remarks about dumper truck drivers and interestingly, environmental degradation. So why are colliery sites, deep mining, valued, but former open cast coaling sites not? And particularly when visually there's very little to choose between the two. So on your left, top and bottom, is Glenbuck open cast in East Ayrshire. And on your right is the site of Comrie Colliery, so deep mining in Fife. Both have undergone restoration. Not much to choose between the two. On the left-hand side, no emotional attachment. Right-hand side, huge amount of emotional attachment. So what was driving this? Ian, the mysterious Ian, wondered if this was about the nature of labour, particularly in response to the dumper truck comment, and more on that shortly. Also, what was becoming increasingly explicit was how many former colliery communities were beginning to feel marginalised, silenced, scapegoated, set against the drive to zero carbon and the guilt and shame that anything coal-connected currently provokes. And it's not just the coal app data that we are set to lose. These sites, both of deep mining and open cast coaling themselves, are under threat. So the Scottish Land Commission, together with the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, established a task force to transform how vacant and derelict land was tackled in Scotland. And in 2020, the Scottish Government announced a £50 million fund to tackle derelict land. The derelict land in Scotland currently amounts to around 11,000 hectares, and post-extractive landscapes account for around about 35% of that. And this was going to be part of a green recovery from the COVID pandemic. And it will include potential redevelopments with affordable housing, low carbon industrial development, woodland and other green spaces for carbon capture and green energy. And this is an example, the proposed eco, leisure and wellness park developments at the St Ninians open cast site at Kelty by National Pride. But also afforestation, for example, at Spears Slack, at Glenbuck and Mains Hill in Douglas, and also geothermal energy. And we have the ambitious plans at Westfield. So for the actual map on your top right kind of details the plans for the site. So Westfield in Fife was one of Scotland's, I think it was Scotland's biggest brownfield site. So they're looking at solar, wind, they're generating energy from waste. There are plans for vertical farming, a sustainable employment hub, recycling and green technologies. And I think rather than pose a threat of loss, I think these developments offer an excellent opportunity to explore the next phase in the story of coal in a more nuanced and affirmative manner that will help challenge and reshape the often negative perceptions of the pit village and might just engage the younger generations by emphasising the black to green energy transitions and highlighting how the historic Landscape Legacies of Coal can help the shift to a post-carbon world. So with all this in mind, we put in a substantial funding application to explore the new avenues and extend the life of the app. And although we scored 6 out of 6 across all criteria, it was not seen as high priority and not funded. So we had a rethink, and we decided that we would prioritise securing a sustainable future for the Coal App database. And we went after National Heritage Lottery funding, which meant we needed a new project. They wouldn't fund something that was already established. So we mulled it over, and an eco-museum of Scottish mining landscape provided a unique solution. And I'm assuming that, originally like me, this will be an unfamiliar concept. How many have actually heard of an eco-museum? Very few. So it's not a new idea. It originated in France in the early 1970s. And the eco prefix refers to ecology, the relationship between living things and their environment. Wonderful for the Coal App. Essentially, they are web-based entities built around sites to visit, walking, cycling, touring routes within a specific landscape or territory that is community-led and a celebration of a sense of place. And I think this slide explains it quite nicely. So they have no walls, no shelving. They do have staff, obviously, to maintain the website. There are roughly 500 eco-museums in the world and just 5 in the UK. The Clean Peninsula in Northwest Wales, I can't pronounce that, sorry if there's any Welsh people in the room. So that celebrates the cultural heritage around the maritime industries in particular. We have Flodden 1513, and that was the first ever cross-border eco-museum between England and Scotland, encompassing around about 40 sites. And then there are 2 wholly in Scotland, Cataran, which was the very, very first eco-museum in the UK. And that covers the area around the Highland Boundary Fault. And then there's the crofting community at Staffan on Skye. Ours will be the first eco-museum in Scotland. We can't claim the UK, we've been beaten. There's one already planned in South Wales in the Neath Valley celebrating steel. Our territory will be the Midland Coalfield, reaching from Fife to Ayrshire. The virtual museum will have 5 pages, home, obviously, our landscape with a collection of walking and cycling routes, both the original and a new collection. A blog. This will showcase the stories around the creation of the routes written by the volunteers. It also permits them to highlight individual features of local mining heritage when the landscape doesn't permit a viable walking route. And it provides a central point for what's on, a network for the mining communities across Scotland to promote and share focused heritage activities out with their immediate local areas. And then we'll have news and activities linked to social media and feedback and evaluation. And this provides formal opportunities to comment on the project, but importantly, it will encourage users of the journeys to contribute their own stories, their memories, add additional point of interest to establish routes if they want, or suggest and create new journeys, as well as reporting landscape changes as the sites are developed and repurposed, so citizen history too. And those of you who are familiar with the current project as it stands will know that we have all of that, but it's all scattered, and this idea of an eco-museum will bring it all together under one roof. So not dissimilar to the Coal App, but bigger, bolder and better. And we've formally teamed up with the National Mining Museum and also the Mining Museum's Friends Group, the Coal Authority, the Scottish Geological Trust, and the Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland, and a community artist, Yvonne Wayhand-Lyle. We're initially focusing on 5 new geographical areas for us, so Midlothian, Fife, Eastern Barton, Lanark and Ayrshire. And importantly, we're expanding the emphasis of the new routes to include a greater focus on A, the diverse and feral ecology of the former colliery sites, particularly the waste tips, to narrate the next story, the next phase in their story, by including afforestation, carbon capture, and the black to green energy transitions, the geothermal, methane, and wind power, and more geology so that we can understand the ground beneath our feet. Our first application, once again, failed. We didn't tick the diversity boxes, but we were invited to revise and resubmit. The application went in on the 31st of October with a decision in around 8 weeks. And finally, what about those unexplored avenues? We decided we would not go after big research funding grants, but we'd simply tackle them one by one in a series of small, unfunded initiatives whenever we could. And over the summer, I joined forces with film and media colleagues and a community artist again to deliver Opencast Echoes. This was a small university-funded initiative using a mix of film, art and history to explore Westfield. Although not designed to answer any of the unanswered and unexplored avenues of our original project, it's kind of made a start. And these are the key findings. When we began opencasting as a wartime expedient, it was aligned with civil as opposed to mine engineering. That maybe explains why there is no emotional attachment. It was short term. Workers were brought in from outside. There was no contribution to community, and they didn't stay. It was very, very short term. In a blink of an eye, it was returned to agricultural land, which is what I kind of remember about opencast coal mining from my youth. The common reuse was return it to rubbish, a rubbish tip, the municipal tip, not popular. So you can kind of see why there isn't that kind of romanticisation about opencast coaling. It has been ignored by historians as well. I mean, we add to this, we're as bad. So when I was searching the literature, much of it is written by geographers and academic planners. And one argument that was put forward, it's quite interesting, is that these landscapes have been absolutely stripped bare of their memories, ostensibly empty land. Oops, I'm going too fast. So an interesting theory kind of floated the ideas past former NCB surveyors at some of the opencast sites. A lot of them volunteer at the Mining Museum. And their responses were equally interesting. No, the memories are not stripped back or gone. They are recorded, removed and stored. Landscape memories are suspended, waiting until such time they are returned to their original home, or they make new memories elsewhere. So lots to think about, and really drifting now into the realms of philosophy. So it's given me yet another avenue that needs to be explored. And I am, in terms of my working life, running out of time. Anyway, to finish off, Ian and I have just got ethical approval to explore this concept of social haunting as applied to deindustrialization. So this is the idea that our past unresolved social trauma, such as the closure of a factory or a mine, has a half-life. It can linger on to inform the present day by perpetuating feelings and experiences of loss, dispossession, unease, unfairness, injustice, regret, remorse, and lack of recognition. It's hidden in plain sight, but it shackles communities to the past. It's not a new avenue that Ian and I are exploring, but it was something that Ian felt was constantly present in the evidence from our original project in the oral testimonies. And this is very much Ian's project. But me, having spent an awful lot of time in former mining communities since starting the Coal Legacies project, I'm a tad sceptical. You know, how long is a half-life? It'll be 40 years next year since the miners' strike. And I began to wonder if it's not the outside agencies such as the press, academia, local authorities, that actually conjure up the ghosts. We look in with preconceived ideas around a pit community and see what we want. So that's my side of the argument, where Ian wholly believes in social haunting. So this is going to be really, really interesting, because we are going to be battling to be right. So we're focusing on Flynn, because the closure of the pit was particularly brutal. So I'm looking at the historical components. I will look at how the settlement has been portrayed in the press and the council minutes, and by historians, etc., etc. And we have an online questionnaire that we are trying to capture the voice of residents, both past and present. We're going to be holding a little community event called Stovies and Stories in the January to capture the non-digital voices, those who are unfamiliar with online questionnaires. So if anyone has lived or worked or continues to live and work in Flynn, love to hear your views, and I've got some flyers that are over on the Well House stand. So I think, to conclude, all I want to say is watch this space. It's crossed.